and welcome to another installment of KMU Conversations. KMU Conversations is an effort on the part of your Kansas municipal utilities to bring the action in the State House to you without you actually having to be in Topeka. Each week, we'll have a different guest interviewed by KMU Executive Director Colin Hansen and myself, Kimberly Swati, KMU Legislative Liaison. So please join us each week and get an up-close look at the 2021 legislative session.
Representative Finch, you are Speaker Pro Tem. We were wondering, what does that mean and how does that differ from other leadership roles?
Well, the Speaker Pro Tem, literally from the Latin for keep Ron Reichman healthy. My main job is to make sure that the Speaker is okay, and if he is not, then I have to step in and do his job. So I have a huge stick that hangs over me all the time if something happens to Ron. So what we do primarily, all of our leadership team on the House side, Speaker Pro Tem, Majority Leader, we work together basically to serve the needs of our caucus. We have 86 Republicans in the House. The Speaker obviously is a constitutional officer. His duties are spelled out in the Constitution. He's to preside over the House, make selections for committees, and kind of sets the overall tone. The Majority Leader handles the calendar and what bills come up for debate in the House and when they come up for debate. And then the Speaker Pro Tem fills in when the Speaker is not available, provides general guidance and assistance to members on things like messaging, constituent services, and helping them. I do a lot of the committee rules and that kind of work to help our chairs to be effective in what they're doing.
The House leadership, you three really do work very closely together. You really work in tandem with one another. So what would you say that are your top priorities or the top priorities of House leadership for this legislative session?
You know, we have quite a few things. Obviously, last year's session was truncated, so there are a lot of things that didn't get done. You know, sometimes it's the unglamorous things like, you know, the abandoned well plugging fund bill that we did last week, you know, but it is important. If you've ever had to deal with something like that, it is important, but it didn't get done last year. But in terms of big priorities this year, obviously, the Value Them Both Amendment was a big priority for a lot of us. In 2019, the Supreme Court read into the Constitution a right of bodily autonomy and made it a fundamental right, so it had the highest level of constitutional scrutiny. In other words, the least amount of deference to legislation that was passed. It makes it easy for the court to overturn laws in those areas. And in this case, the area was abortion. The Value Them Both Amendment puts that question to the voters in 2022 to allow them to make the decision on whether they believe the court got that decision right or whether they want the legislature to be able to pass regulations in that area. So that was a big thing. It took 2/3 in the House and 2/3 in the Senate. Property tax reform, some kind of property tax transparency, some kind of dealing with, you know, you have municipal utilities that make up your membership. They know what a pain the tax lid has been. And we tried to tell folks going in that was only going to create a perverse incentive for cities to raise taxes because you can't make that up in an emergency. You either have to use your capacity or you lose it. And so part of the property tax reform is to do away with that tax lid and make it a little easier for cities and counties, I think, to handle matters like that. We've got the Kansas Promise Act. That's a scholarship program for every Kansas high school graduate who wants to go on and live and work in Kansas. They can get 2 years of community college or tech or trade school for free, but they have to commit to living and working here for 2 years after they graduate. So that's a big deal for us. We've got a first-time homebuyer program we're pushing. We've got a rural healthcare innovation fund to help our hospitals and healthcare facilities in rural areas. And some of those are kind of the high priorities for us. We really want to try to help rural areas develop and grow.
So a couple of those resonate from, I think you and the Speaker and the Majority Leader last year put forth a package, and several of those were topics that you put forth last legislative session that, again, just due to the truncated session, didn't get across the finish line, but several of those will do great things for the rural areas. I mean, I think there's probably no denying that the Emergency Management Act is going to be looked at significantly. One of the things that impacted us significantly during COVID was early on, as the pandemic was beginning to unfold, a lot of our communities began voluntarily. There was no statewide requirement, nothing, no executive order, nothing from the KCC mandating us to do this, but they immediately began suspending utility disconnections. And they sustained that through the spring and in many cases through early summer. And then immediately began working with those customers who did have trouble. And then during the fall, as cases really began to climb again and the situation worsened, our communities led by Russell and Kansas City BPU began suspending those utility disconnections again, which I think has been great. Again, without an executive order or anything of that sort. So I think as you all, go down the path of exploring the Emergency Management Act, are you thinking that it will be like a wholesale change to the Emergency Management Act, or do you think like a new section will be created kind of more specific to kind of a pandemic sort of scenario?
Yeah, a couple of options on the table with that. One is, do we look at whether or not the cause of the disaster, is it a pandemic versus I hate to say it this way, but like the garden variety disasters we're used to in Kansas, tornadoes, fires, droughts, that kind of thing, flooding. And then you create a separate category for human pandemics, and these are the rules we follow in those cases. The other question is, do we just do it by duration? Because the year before COVID hit in Kansas, we did have a flooding disaster in areas of our state that actually lasted from the time the legislature left in May until January when we came back, and nobody talked about it. I mean, it's not like the pandemic, because you didn't have issues of restricting gathering sizes or travel or telling people where they could or couldn't go. And so that one was relatively non-controversial, but perhaps the better test than what is the root cause is what is the duration of the pandemic. And see, all of the powers that a governor exercises in times of disaster, many of those are legislative functions. Allowing telehealth, for example, or barring utility disconnects, for example. Those are legislative powers. Under our Constitution, they would be reserved to the legislature to make those decisions. So in a disaster, some of those powers get delegated to the executive branch. And because we have a citizen legislature that's only in session between January and May in most years, it's very difficult to manage those disasters outside of session. And we really do need some way to have a check and balance. So that I'm a team legislature guy. So I'm all about checking executive power, which is what the founders of our government intended. And we lose those checks and balances when we just go home in May and there's a disaster declaration in place. So those are the kind of the two options that we're looking at. I don't think we'll see anything as granular as putting utility disconnects or anything about utility service in the act itself. It'll be more about the broad powers that may be exercised and whatever checks and balances need to be in place to make sure that they're exercised properly.
As you know, our membership is made up of communities that operate one or more municipal electric, natural gas, water, wastewater utilities all across the state. Was wondering if you are hearing of anything or know of anything that might be of concern to our membership and our ability to continue to provide those services to our communities.
We've seen over the last couple of years a battle about utility rates. Those primarily go to the investor-owned utilities and not to the municipals. And because of the work of KMU and your board and Kimberly, you've been wisely, I think, left out of those conversations. Or kind of put on the sidelines, I should say, not left out, but you've not been a target for those who are trying to make those changes. And I think that's probably a good thing in the long run. I do think that we'll see some things. There's a bill about not allowing cities to preclude like the use of natural gas. Comes from more of an ecological angle. And I think there's really only one city in the state that's even looked at doing that or is being considered doing that. Maybe they've not even looked at it, but that's all it takes up here. One group to talk about it or one case to happen in some part of the state, and all of a sudden we're going to get a bill about it. But I think that one is probably the one that I think is most relevant to your members. I'm not seeing a lot of action on municipal utilities in our utility committee just yet. Like I said, they're kind of clearing a backlog from last year and having some conversations around some of those issues. And so hopefully, and this is, I think, the hope of anybody who interfaces with the legislature often, the hope is that you get left alone this year. And that's often the best you can ask for.
Indeed. Question number 1, if aliens came to Earth and abducted one of the towns in your district, which would it be and why?
Well, one of the towns in they'd probably take Williamsburg because they can get Guy and May's ribs. And so they would probably take that and decide that was one of the tastiest things they could take off this planet.
I love it. Perfect. If you look at your district map, the city limits of Vassar are about as big as Ottawa's. So where's the secret gold mine?
Well, so far Vassar's only supplied me opponents in elections. So my funny story about Vassar, my great grandmother lived in Vassar. She lived in her home until she was 101, and then went to the nursing home in Linden. So I have a real affinity for Vassar. And they ran the grocery store there in town, the Preby family grocery store in Vassar. So I don't know, maybe Grandma Preby had knowledge of the gold mine, but I think it's probably just about all that sweet beachfront property.
I love it. Okay, you are a state representative for the city of Troy in approximately 800 BC. So do you advocate that they bring in the wooden horse or not?
Oh, no, that's never a good idea. Yeah. Well, you should not look a gift horse in the mouth. You should definitely not accept large free wooden horses parked outside the gates of your city. City attorney, I've always counseled my commissioners and city managers to avoid those kinds of gifts.
I love it. Okay. And then if you had to be a state representative in another country, which would you choose?
Probably the Virgin Islands.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I could probably get used to doing some legislative work from the beach.
That's a great choice. Yeah, I will gladly be your office administrator there. Well, those are a super tough questions. Thank you for answering.
Yeah, wow, we had to go in the Wayback Machine and then think about losing parts of my district. So
right, and then we went around the world.
Yeah, and redistricting is next year, so that's actually a scary proposition. That
right.
Yeah.
Well, so don't let them take any part of Vassar.
Yeah, right. So no, I enjoy the opportunity to visit with you guys, and hopefully your members enjoy the conversation when they get a chance to view it. And I just appreciate everything that you both do, and obviously as city attorney for Ottawa, we appreciate KMU and the role that you play in advocating for all of the municipal utilities. They have an important function, and from time to time citizens will pop up and say, oh, you should sell off the utilities, why do we do this? And I think it helps to have an organization not only that lobbies for utilities, but to help educate people about why municipal utilities have a role to play.
Oh, well,
thank you very much, and we thank you for your continued support, your support over the years, and your friendship to keep.
Hey, you bet.
Your leadership.
Looking forward to getting together in person soon.